Okay, well, for this week, this is week 12, I believe. This is week 12 of class, and 2 weeks left after this week. That's pretty crazy that this summer semester is almost done. I definitely enjoyed these classes. So this week, we're actually finishing the Chinese class. This will be the last class of lecture and taking quizzes and reading things. The only thing I have to do in that class after this is I have a capstone essay. I've got to do like a 5-page essay on a trend I've seen through the whole class about the Chinese culture. So let's talk about the Chinese stuff. This was a really fun one. So we got into like the 1400s time frame with Chinese history. So after the Mongol Empire, and then up to into the 1800s, almost 1900s, basically for Chinese history. So almost getting into more modern history of China. I found out, I did not know this. So the dynasty, the Ming dynasty, after after the Mongols, after the Yuan dynasty, the Ming dynasty is one that we get a tremendous amount of influence from because whenever we think of China, like Chinaware, fancy plates and cups and bowls and serving dishes and stuff, that idea comes from cookware from the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty used to make a porcelain dish, like a plate or a cup or a water holder or a bowl that was kind of a white porcelain, but it had a blue uh, textile laid on it. So flower designs, dragon designs, other things like that. The print on it would be blue with a white background, basically. That is Ming porcelain china, earthenware type stuff, and they're really expensive, really valuable. But that's where we get a lot of that from. So, in the Ming Dynasty, they decided that they wanted to do some exploring. So, boats and ships were becoming a bigger deal. They had a navy that fought against the Mongol Empire, and the Mongol Empire invented their own navy and actually did better, smaller, faster, lighter boats than the Chinese had at that time. But the Chinese wanted to do more exploration, and so they built some boats. Oh my gosh. These boats were just astounding. So if we think of the concept of Christopher Columbus, he's one of the most famous voyagers that we know of from Europe. He sailed 1492, thinking. So this is interesting because he was thinking he was going to China, basically, and that side of the world to do trade. Because to do trade back then, you either had to go over land, like the Silk Road, to get to China, or you had to go down through either sail around Africa or sail across the Mediterranean and then trek down. They didn't have the Suez Canal necessarily, and trek across Arabia, then get back on a boat, go through India and around there and past the Philippines and up and around to get to China. So he just thought, well, if I go that way, I just make it around the globe and come to the other side where China is. That should be easy. What he didn't know was there's a whole continent in between Europe and China. And that's when he ran into Dominican Republic, basically, thinking it was the Philippines area. Basically, he thought he would hit the island chains like in the Philippines, Indonesia, that area basically, which is why they were called Indians. He called the people in Dominican Republic Indians because he thought he had hit East Indies basically, and he didn't. He hit the Caribbean instead. But then that's all history. We've seen all that. So China had somebody a little before Columbus so Columbus sailed 1492. This guy, I can't remember off the top of my head the guy's name. Yeah, sorry, Professor Brown, if you're watching this. I finished that lecture this morning, and I just can't remember how to pronounce that guy's name. But anyways, he was commissioned to sail like a Christopher Columbus to do some exploring, and he made it. He did 7 voyages. He made it from China all the way over through Africa, down through the Philippines area to the East Indies, up into Middle Eastern areas, India, other places like that. He did down the coast of Africa to an extent, did a lot of exploring. But holy cow, just like everything else, Chinese did it before the Europeans, and they did it way better than the Europeans. So Christopher Columbus had 4 boats. They were about, if I remember right, 62 feet long. They had a crew of about 70 per boat. That was his excursion. They ate on that boat what a thing is called hardtack. And what it is you'd make bread, a special kind of bread, basically, unleavened type bread, and then you dry it out. And it was meant to basically not spoil. Even if it got wet, it wouldn't go bad on you. It probably did a little bit if it got too soaked, but or fell apart. But devoid of taste, devoid. It's like today's cracker. Imagine going on a cruise and the only thing you could eat is saltine crackers that are thicker and not light and fluffy and crumbly, but thick and hard, basically, like a big thick stale cracker. That's what they ate, hardtack. Um, so they were, by the time Christopher Columbus had landed his boat, the people on his boat, his crew, could not wait to get off. They were starving. They were struggling. So the boats that China made, this guy, his fleet wasn't 4 boats, it was 67 boats, 62 boats, something like that. I should get my notes out. Let me get my notes out. Anyways, he had like 62 boats, something like that. And these boats were about 416 feet long. So, and like they were 4 times bigger. One Chinese boat was like 4 times bigger, 4 or 5 times bigger than each boat that Christopher Columbus had. So huge, massive boats. Christopher Columbus could haul 250 tons on his boats. These Chinese boats would haul 2,500 tons per boat. And he had like 62 of them. So he had a ton of space. These are huge boats. Like it's amazing. Look up Chinese Ming Dynasty boats and you'll see them. It's astounding. Absolutely astounding. They actually had, let's see, I'll get on my statistics here. Okay, here we go. Oh, Columbus's boats were 80 feet long. Sorry. So the Chinese had Zhang He, that was his name, and 62 treasure ships, 416 feet long, 2,500 tons. They're literally the largest wooden boats ever built in the history of the world. Absolutely monstrous boats. I could not imagine if you're like, hey, we're going to go, if they use those as like a warship, I could not imagine, boats going against them, realizing these boats are like, each boat's 5 times the size of my boat. And they got 62 of them. Holy cow. These boats were so big, in fact, they actually had a waterproof storage tank in them where they could store fish. So they're out fishing, gathering fish up, they could put them in the boat and keep them. So when they're out on the ocean exploring or out where they're not going to get a lot of fish, they have fresh fish in their boat, like a built-in aquarium inside the boat, where they could just pick up the fresh fish and then eat it. They had more room for fruit. They had spots where you could grow like herbs and things. More doctors were on board. So the Chinese were building boats that were the size of a cruise ship today, kind of an idea, just huge boats. And so they had luxury. Like these boats were luxurious. This was not, we're eking out a barely survivable living just trying to make it across the ocean like Columbus had. The stern post rudder was 36 feet tall on these. If you're a boat aficionado, you'll know that's huge. That's a big deal. I thought what was really interesting too, they built these boats to be compartmentalized and watertight. And what that means is if one part of the boat sprung a leak, like a bottom section of the boat hit a reef and it popped a hole in the bottom, instead of the whole boat, we see like on Pirates of the Caribbean movies and these shows, you poke a hole in the boat, the whole boat eventually sinks and is gone. These Chinese ships, they built them to be compartmentalized, and so when one part of the ship got hit and started to flood, they would lock it down, and so that it would contain the flood to that section, and then the rest of the boat would be fine, which is what modern ships do today. That's why they have those different doors and sections. They can section off the ship to limit the flooding into the boats. Submarines do the same thing as well. So, but they did that back then. China did that back then. It's really fascinating. So, anyways, they did a lot of exploring. Now, you might be thinking, well, why didn't China conquer Europe then? I mean, they definitely had an army. China had an army of people that dwarfed anything that China had, or Europe had ever seen. From a conquest military standpoint, Europe never stood a chance at any point in history against China. China would have annihilated them. And to have boats this size, why wasn't it China? Why was the Dutch East India Trade Company that dominated trade routes versus China? And I was wondering that question too, and thankfully Professor Brown in our class answered that question in the lecture. He said that it came down to a difference of motivation. Basically, the Chinese believed they called their empire, the Chinese Empire, the Central Kingdom. It's called the Central Kingdom because they believed they were like the apex of living in the world. They were the posh. They were the best of everything. And so everyone should just pay tribute to them because they are the most amazing, most civilized people in the world. So when he did this voyage, they weren't looking to like conquer other territories and take all the resources, which is what the conquistadors did after Columbus, from Portugal with the slave trades and Spain as well. What China did is they showed up these other countries going, look at our big boats, look at the luxury we have all this opulence and amazing stuff. You should pay tribute to us, worship the emperor. And then nations would be like, yep, you're right. Here, we're going to give you a bunch of gold and silver. Here's jewels and things from our, we're going to pay our tax to you, basically like a tribute, and we'll venerate your emperor. Great. And then I'm sure when they left, that nation went, oh, whatever. We won't worry about them until they come back. But that's all they wanted. They just wanted everyone to pay a tribute to the emperor and respect him. That was it. Whereas that's a whole different motivation. Whereas Spain and Portugal, when they did the slave trade and all the other things, they were looking for how can we exploit the resources? How can we extract all the gold and silver, move it back to our country? How can we have slave labor? How can we, do economic things? And so Spain and Portugal and England and those areas was they were growing. They wanted to dominate. They wanted more economic structure and things. And China wasn't interested in that as far as expanding out. China's very nationalistic in that they believe in themselves, they can take care of themselves. And every once in a while they'll open up to foreigners for a while, then they'll close down, and then they'll open up to foreigners and close down, and that's changed some of their society around. For the better usually, but it's really interesting. So that was kind of a fun thing to learn. And some of the modernization, China started adopting clocks. China adopted food like corn and potatoes and beans and chili peppers and things that were that would grow better in harder climates, like up in the north where the deserts were being more common. They would grow in drier, arid areas. So that meant a lot more food, a lot less famines and problems. Because if southern China went into a drought, they had a hard time growing. But now northern China could produce food, even in a drought. And so now they had prosperity and a lot more good things for their society. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of good stuff to wrap up our class on China. My intro to religious studies class has been an interesting one. This one's been a little wild. We had a couple of essays to do. This week, this module, this is the continuation of last week's module. We talked about religious violence as well as the debate between science and religion. In my essay to the class on religious violence, I kind of took a different perspective. I mean, religious violence is there. We look at the Crusades. We look at how many things are done in the name of God, not the Crusades from the Christian side, but even the Crusades from the Islamic side as well. We see lots of things where bad things are done in the name of religion. Persecuting Jews and other things sometimes is done in the name of religion. Persecuting minorities and other groups in the name of religion. And so there's a lot of physical violence that happens, but our professor was talking about there's other like social, economic factors that can play into defining what is religious violence. The professor did make the comment that in there he defined religious violence broad enough to say if you have a rule or a standard in your religion, like the example that was used is tithing. If you have to pay tithing to get access to certain benefits in your religion, then that is a form of religious violence because you are excluding people from these things. And I pushed back against that philosophy. I see that more as a liberal ideology, more modern liberal ideology, masquerading as a religious principle of this exclusionary thing. Because here's the thing: in my mind, there's a difference on violence of if I do it to you. So if I force you to pay a tithing, you have no say in it. That would be considered a violent act because I'd probably have to enforce it through physical means. And if you reject it, then you are going against it, and then I would impose the law on you, and then police would get involved, and it would be a really bad situation. So that would be like a religious violence. I'm imposing my religion on you. However, though, if I ask you, hey, if you want to join our church, you have to pay tithing, and you say, nah, I'm good. I don't want to pay tithing, so I'm not going to join your church. That's not violence. That's agency. That's choice. And so I try to delineate that out in my essay this week about that, and just that if it's okay to have a standard that people have to meet to be in your religion, so long as you give the people the choice, basically, to do it. Not thinking about that as violence is like saying just because we give, so if you think about it in the context of sports, if we give the winner a trophy, that is violence against the losers. And that's not how I see it. That's it's not like it's not like the winners were arbitrarily made winners. Now, if they cheated or if the system was rigged to let one team win and everybody else lose, that's a whole nother ball of wax. That's criminal. That's problematic. But if they all competed equally and they all had their choices to make in their competitions, and one team did better than the rest, just because that one team that won got a trophy and nobody else did, doesn't mean that's violence against the losers. You can't have violence by default, and violence should never be defined by the victim. It needs to be objectively defined by somebody who's a third party, basically, so that they can say, yes, here's where the problems are, and let's get this sorted out. So I talked about that in my essay. So hopefully the professor doesn't ding me for kind of pushing back against that definition in the lectures. So far, some of the people in the class have agreed with my opinion, which has been good. The other thing is the science idea. Does science and religion oppose each other? Or can they be exclusive to each other? Can they help each other? And there's varying opinions and ideas on this. We actually watched a video that was a TED Talk of a gentleman who is Christian, but he has a doctorate degree in evolutionary science. So he is a Christian. He believes in Christ and in God, but he also fully understands Darwinian science, basically, of evolution and things. And so for some people, they would say that's a complete contradiction. You can't be a good Christian and think Darwin had a good idea. Evolution and creationism must be morally opposed. And he looked at it and said, I don't think they're opposed. I think they're looking at the same thing from two different perspectives. And it's okay to learn those perspectives. I agree with science, but I believe in God. And so it's an interesting debate, an interesting thing to look at. A lot of people, including Albert Einstein and Pascal and other scientists, look at the idea and say, science helps us explain how God does what he does. But religion is about believing in God and salvation, basically, which is more spiritual versus physical and temporal. So I don't think in my mind, religion and science have no problems working together. Religion sometimes helps us understand and clarify science, and sometimes science helps us be better at understanding our religion. So looking at it from both perspectives, they're just opposite sides of the same coin, basically. Learn them both. It's okay. It's okay to understand evolution, even if you are a creationist. There's opportunities to look at both sides and go, okay, there's truth and there's error on both sides. A lot of creationists will, there are some creationists, I should say, that will believe very literally in the Bible that the creation story in the book of Genesis literally only took 6,000 years to happen, and broken into 1,000 year periods type idea. And your evolutionists will be like, but according to what we understand of how the earth changes, it would take hundreds of millions of years for that creation process to happen. That doesn't mean just because they have different conclusions doesn't mean they're opposed to each other or one's right, one's wrong. They're looking at it from different perspectives, but maybe somewhere in between is the truth. So that's the way to look at it. So be careful. Science isn't absolute. Some people believe science is the real thing and religion is baloney. And everybody's open to their own opinion. That's where agency comes in, is you can choose to believe what you want to believe. But I think it's healthier to look at both of them, because science can't save your soul, but religion won't help you understand how things work. So you want to have both, I think is a good way to do that. So if you have any thoughts and ideas on religious violence or science and religion and things, put it in the comments, or questions and things, and we'll discuss them there as well. But thanks for watching our update. I'll have at least one more update next week for this semester, summer semester, and then we'll probably have it finished up. But I've got a lot of books I'm reading for next semester, so I'm going to start talking about those books for my next semester classes. So I've got several books to read for my Mormonism and early American history class. So I'm going to talk about those ones over the next couple of weeks as we get ready for fall semester. And then in fall semester, I have one class that's my master's level class. I have 12 books to read for that class. So we're going to talk about a different book every week for that class. So I've read several of them already to get a head start, and they're really fun. I'm excited to share those with you. So stay tuned. We'll keep these updates going, and yeah, we'll see you then.